Okay.
Got it.
Got it. Anyway,
Oh.
this is the introduction to a book, and now let's see if I can get to the top here so we can.
Jenean, I just wanted to very briefly introduce you to Soteria. This is a 34th meeting of Soteria on film noir, dark, deadly, or depraved. And this is Jenean McBrearty. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Very, very, very well done.
Thank you. Introducing a subject that certainly interests me and about which I know extremely little. So over to you, Jenean.
Okay. Like I said, this is an introduction to a book, Panorama of American Film Noir by Raymond Bordy and Etienne Chemeton.
Humaton, I suppose. Yeah.
But anyway, this was his introduction. And let's just start here. In the long history of French commentary on American culture, Raymond Bordy and Etienne Chemeton's A Panorama of American Film Noir occupies a special place. The first book ever written about a type of film for which Hollywood itself had no name. Panorama influenced cineasts of the late 20th century in almost the same way as Charles Baudelaire. Essays on Edgar Allan Poe influenced the literary world of the late 19th century. It gave identity and cachet to scores of pictures that might otherwise have been forgotten, and in the process helped to establish what today's movie industry regards as a fully fledged genre. None of the many writers of film noir after Bordy and Chemeton has not been indebted to their book in some fashion, even if she or he hasn't read Panorama, which until now has never been completely translated into English. And few works of criticism in any field have had such a seminal effect on both scholars and artists. Not the least of the reasons why Panorama remains an important book is the fact that it was written by a pair of intelligent, discerning viewers who were contemporary with the films under discussion. The first two editions were published in the 1950s. In direct response to a series of hard-boiled thrillers and bloody melodramas, beginning with John Huston's somewhat campy but sinister Maltese Falcon in 1941, and culminating with Robert Aldrich's jagged apocalyptic Kiss Me Deadly in 1955, that Hollywood had been producing with some regularity for about 15 years, although many of the films were redolent of pre-Second World War European cinema. Bordy and Chemeton regarded them almost entirely as products of their country of origin, shaped by the Hollywood system of production and expressive of the quotidian violence and criminality of American life. That in itself is actually pretty interesting, because America has always had this reputation for being a very violent place. So at least for these people, it seemed kind of standard fare for America. A handful of commentators in America had already agreed with this idea, at least to a degree. Let's see if I can get over here now. Uh-oh, gonna have problems. No, we're not. Okay, here we go. A handful of commentators in America had already agreed to this idea, at least to a degree. In 1946, the German cultural critic Siegfried Kracauer, who had moved to the United States because of the war, wrote a think piece for Commentary magazine on the question of Hollywood's terror films. Do they reflect a state of mind? Having recently completed From Caligari to Hitler, a celebrated book about Weimar cinema, Kracauer argued that recent Hollywood pictures such as Shadow of Doubt, The Lost Weekend, The Stranger, and The Spiral Staircase were similar to certain German films of the 1920s and were symptomatic of a growing American-style decadence. Not long afterward, John Houseman offered his own version of the same argument in Vogue, implicitly criticizing one of his former collaborators, Raymond Chandler, Blue Dahlia, 1946, for pandering to the American zeitgeist by means of tough movies about a land of enervated, frightened people with spasms of vitality, but a low moral sense. What made Bordy and Charmerton different from Krakauer and Hausmann was that, in common with most of their French colleagues, they didn't react to a tone of moral panic. On the contrary, they were fascinated by the perverse eroticism of post-war Hollywood thrillers. In their view, such pictures functioned as a critique of savage capitalism and a realistic, or at any rate fairly truthful, antidote to the social uplift in the average studio manufactured daydream. So somebody will take over?
Surely. Stead, you want to take over? Shall I take over? Are you there, Stead? Oh, perhaps he's on mute. Can you hear me?
Michael, yeah, you take over.
Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah. Is it possible to make it a little bit larger? I'm peering.
Yeah, there's a slide bottom right that looks possible to enlarge move.
A slide.
Oh, right.
Oh, yes. Does that make it a bit now?
No, it's gone down if anything. There we are, that's better.
I mean, it doesn't look any different.
Doesn't look any different to me, no.
No, oh well.
Okay, I can cope. I just have to peer rather close. You have to see my face close up. We got to, I think, because they were French, is it?
Yeah.
Because they were French, Borde and Charmerton also had a good term to apply to the films they admired. The adjective noir had long been used in France to describe the Gothic novel. And in the 1930s, it was sometimes employed in descriptions of French poetic realist films, such as Pépé le Mouco and Le Jour se lève. It was best known in relation to the Série Noire, a series of crime novels that Gallimard from 1945 until now issued in paperback edition as littérature de la gare, or train station literature. The black and yellow covered
Something. Oh, here we are.
and no. Gallimard books appealed to a wide range of readers, and under the astute editorship of Marcel Duhamel, they offered lively French translations of the new wave of crime writers who had emerged in America and England in the wake of Dashiell Hammett. I get all the latest roman policier sent to me from Paris, Colonel Hackey says in Eric Ambler's classic thriller, A Coffin for Demetrius. All the best of them are translated into French. Thus, in 1946, with the war ended and Hollywood movies once again appearing on Paris movie screens, several French critics were immediately attracted to the Maltese Falcon, Double Indemnity, oh yeah, I remember that, Murder, My Sweet, and Laura, and they knew what to name them. According to Nino Frank, who was writing that year in the socialist film journal L'Écran Français, something new had developed during the war. Here were excellent American productions dealing with criminal adventure, all of them grounded in the social fantastic and the dynamism of violent death, which could truly be called film noir. In an important sense, the French invented the American film noir, and they did so because local conditions predisposed them to view movies in a certain way. Unlike America, France had a thriving film culture made up of journals and ciné-club that treated film as art rather than commercial entertainment. France was also emerging from what it called les années noires, the dark years of the occupation, and its younger generation was especially attracted to American jazz clubs and the smoky, world-weary ambiance of the average Bogart thriller. Among literary intellectuals, this was, of course, the period of existentialism, when American crime writers like Hammett, Raymond Chandler, and James M. Cain, along with pre-war American novelists such as Ernest Hemingway, John Dos Passos, William Faulkner, and Richard Wright, who had also written about crime and violence, were regarded as existentialist avant la lettre. No wonder the French admired the 1946 production of The Killers, which was elaborated from a Hemingway short story of the 1920s. The opening of that film, in which a couple of hired gunmen walk into a small town diner on their way and complain about the menu, seems to prefigure the dark absurdism of existentialist playwrights like Samuel Beckett and the early Harold Pinter.
Could I just ask a question? I didn't really understand what's grounded in quotation marks, the social fantastic, end quotation. What is the social fantastic?
I think you can compare it to magical realism in literature today. They have all these names that I'm not quite sure, because it was written in 1955. I don't really know exactly what they're referring to, but the term itself implies some sort of the fantastic, which is, depending on your culture, what that word would mean. Okay, to Americans, something that's fantastic is just wonderful. To other people, it's more of a dreamlike state and a almost surrealistic, and they get into that in a little bit later in the article.
All right, maybe we'll sort of move forward and it will become clear. I could understand the other thing, the dynamism of violent death. That is straightforward English. I understand what that means, but yeah,
Yes,
this fantastic. Michael, do you know what that is?
Well, yes, I think it's a little bit what Jenean said. I mean, I was thinking of when was Zizi dans le métro? When was Zizi dans le métro? That was in the 60s, wasn't it? And it was this combination of realism with something that isn't realism anymore. It's kind of a symbolism. It's fantastique. It involves your imagination. It's your imagination of the real coming into the real, something like that. I mean, I think it's been quite strong in French literature. I'm reading some of the short stories of Chateau Renaud, and he's full of this merging of the believable with the unbelievable, so that you almost don't know. And even Jean Raspail, which I talked about, has something of that. I don't really automatically can associate that very strongly with English literature. If you ask me spontaneously, I couldn't think of anyone in English literature like that. But I'm not speaking in an area where I feel myself very strong. I'm just saying that tentatively.
All right, let's pass on then. Thank you.
Oh, maybe the film If. I mean, Lindsay Anderson's If. That would be a good example in English culture. I think everyone's seen the film If. That's got it. You know, with that they have to apologize, and everything seems to be normal. And then the headmaster pulls out a drawer from a chest of drawer, and there is the master they've insulted, who's lying in there, and they shake hands with him. And you need about 5 seconds before you realize, wait a minute, that's completely ridiculous. No teacher's lying in a chest of drawers. But it's so well done that it takes you about 5 seconds to realize this is complete fantasy. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe that was the thing too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that film noir is grounded in. Okay, well,
that's another part. I don't know enough about film.
Let's press on then. Let's press on.
Well, and some of the noir stories seem unrealistic, and I'm thinking now of what's the name of that movie, where they're all in the desert and everybody comes to this diner, whatever. And what's his name? I'm so terrible on names. But anyway, they sit around and mumble and mumble. And one guy's a writer from England, and the other thing, and they have all this drama. And it's like, well, wait a minute, what are they all doing in the middle of the desert?
Yeah.
Diner? How did they get there? And it's almost like there's no explanation. Just all of a sudden they're just there, and it has an aura of unrealism about it, to the point where you're going, after a while, you kind of scratch your head and you say, wait a minute, I can't suspend my disbelief anymore.
And this is a part of film noir. Now, I mean, my uneducated assumption was that film noir was quite gritty, quite realistic, and without anything that's obviously fantastical, I suppose. So I mean, that's not what I was expecting to hear, but I mean, I'm here to
I think that the word outlandish may be a better translation of the word fantastic in this particular circumstance.
Yeah,
It's, you see something, you just say, what? that's weird. It's just so outlandish. Does this really, and of course for film noir people, which by the way, I knew people that were like noir people. And in the sense that after the war, they were a different stripe of Americans than they were before they left. If that makes any sense. I think when we get to the PowerPoint, I think it'll become actually more clear. But anyway, where are we now? We are at.
It was not the existentialists. I think that's where we are. Shall I continue or someone else?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
continue.
It was not the existentialists, however, who wrote the most interesting commentaries on film noir. That honor belongs to the surrealists, who were a residual force in French intellectual life, especially where movies were concerned. Many art historians have claimed surrealism ended with the 1930s, but its influence on the general culture persisted a good deal longer, affecting the way certain films were viewed in the period between 1945 and 1970, and in some way inflecting the style of theorists such as Roland Barthes, Jacques Lacan, and Jacques Derrida. Notice as well that surrealists provided a model for avant-garde provocateur Guy Debord, who named one of the situationalist Internationale's most famous manifestations of the 1960s after a volume of Weegee photographs and a Hollywood film noir, The Naked City. Surrealism, in fact, had always been crucial to the reception of any art described as noir. In 1940, for instance, André Breton had published his Anthologie de l'humeur noire, a collection of subversively dark humor that celebrated what Breton called a superior revolt of the mind against bourgeois sentimentality. Marcel Duhamel, the editor of the Série Noire, was himself a member of the original French surrealist group. And in the brief introduction he provided for a French edition of Borde and Chamarton's Panorama, included in this volume, he reminisces about the period 1923 to 26, when he and his fellow surrealists watched American crime films that were curious, nonconformist, and as noir as you could wish.
Well, I think we'll stop here and we will go to the PowerPoint. And the reason that I wanted us to read this particular part of this article is the vocabulary that they're using. Surrealism in the history of film noir. In the books that I read, everybody talks about German expressionism, and yet you've got the French people talking about surrealism. So there seems to be a disconnect in terms of what the term meant to the French, to Americans, and to Germans, who have terms that are kind of like about the same thing, but not exactly. In fact, they said one of the terms is not easily translatable. And we know that to be true. It's very difficult to make a direct translation for many of these terms. But as we go through the PowerPoint, it'll be clear why we read this particular part of this introduction. If we can go to, and let me clear out.
I think you stop share and then you,
stop
you
share. Okay.
do another share and then you select what you want to share.
Right. Okay. Now we are going to go to. Come on now. Come on.
PowerPoint. Dark, deadly, depraved. I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
No, Depraved, yes, that was the title.
Now, I'm not quite sure how we get rid of this side thing.
Yeah. I think if you press something to actually start the PowerPoint, and I think at the moment it's in a it's slideshow. Yeah, try slideshow at the top.
Slideshow.
No, at the top. Go to the top on the.
There we are. Next one.
Up a bit.
Up a bit.
Up a bit.
Up.
Up. Animation slideshow.
It's on the kind of brown band at the top.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7th from the left.
7th on the
Got
left.
it.
Yeah, try that slideshow. And you
Yeah, I'm
should
not seeing
that
the slideshow
slideshow.
on mine.
Oh, you should do. There's a sort of
I have
orange
view
bar.
slide.
You should see. Can you see the orange bar?
Can you see? Yeah,
Yes,
yeah. Go.
I got it. Yeah,
That's it.
okay.
Yeah.
I think if you go to start slideshow, slideshow
Or
from
from
beginning.
beginning. From beginning.
Yeah, from beginning.
Yeah.
Okay,
Hey,
good deal. Now, to get to the next slide,
Now, this is a great challenge. Which film is that?
I know. It's just she look evil. God.
Well, yes, she is. She is a femme fatale. There's no doubt about it.
And he looks like a
There we
typical
go.
victim. Yeah.
Okay, if you look at, I see now how to do this. Okay, what are Norse stories about? And it's simply about ordinary people.
Mm.
It's sort of like the transition that was made in the Impressionists of writing about everyday people, little pictures of, you know, milkmaids and geese and that sort of thing, farmers and stuff, the everyday people. But in the city, these people get caught up in their own human failings, right? Ordinary vices of greed, jealousy, and mostly they end in murder, mayhem, and they fall victim to fatalism and devilish destiny they cannot escape. It's this whole idea of, and this will go back to German expressionism, of being caught like a spider in a web. And the web is human nature, basically, because we all are a little bit greedy. We're all capable of murder. And film noir just takes these ordinary people and puts them in circumstances where they meet gangsters and, you know, killers and stuff. Whereas middle-class people, even working class people, may not run into a lot of killers in their lifetime, and may not get caught up in mob violence within their lifetime. So understand that for at least American noir films, they're just regular people. Now, there is an argument, well, I won't say an argument, a dispute maybe, of what constitutes a film noir. Because why? Well, most films have bad people, good people. Most people, or most films like Westerns, they're violent. How come they're not considered noir? Well, the criteria, and this is what these people went through in Panorama in their book, is what exactly is a film noir when you're looking at it, and what differentiates it from any other crime film. Well, for one thing, most of them are in black and white. For the classic era, colored films or films in color don't matter. They have to be black and white. They have to be urban, and of course, very dangerous. The themes are very oppressive. The characters are seedy, they're cynical, they're immoral, the plots are pessimistic, visuals and dialogue are sharp and stark. Lots of angles, again, going back to the German expressionists. And here's where it gets, is what they're talking about, this the sexuality of the noir film. The men are at the mercy of outside forces, and usually beautiful, no good women. So it's all y'all's fault. You just can't say no to a good looking woman. The sets are very claustrophobic as a representation of the prisons of our own vices and our own human nature, and an ever-present threat of aberrational violence and sexual tension. It's not just any old violence, it's aberrational violence. And if you think of, let's say, White Heat, I'm on top of the world, you know, he's a very nutty kind of a person. There's all kinds of mommy and daddy issues. There's a lot of Freudism in it, of people who are, you know,
The big heat.
aberrational. So this is our criteria now for what constitutes a real noir. not pseudo. Noir people can be anybody, right? Insurance agents in double indemnity, they own gas stations in Out of the Past, or simply be a private investigator, but they all live in these cages of their own making. And I've got some of these pictures of course, the three big famous film noirs, which is Double Indemnity, Out of the Past, and The Big Sleep, which I never knew what that meant until I was older. It means being dead. It all began with the camera.
Oh, Ginny, can I ask you, what was the source of the photograph of the cities, the street scene when just before this slide? Yes, where did that come from?
It comes from a site where you go to get noir pictures.
Oh,
Yeah, it's from
No.
one of the many movies, but it is representational of
That's real.
what
Kind
the
of
ideal noir
Film noir
set is,
answer that.
right? The setting, the city, the dark, the lights, you know,
okay.
this idea of nightlife and dirty kind of undercutting of
I
morality.
thought the sweet smell of success with about journalism, but oh well,
If you recognize it, that'd be great if you could tell me what it is.
yeah, maybe. Okay.
But it's a stand-in for just about any
only
city
Thank
noir film you want to look at, really. And a lot of these things become conventions after a while. Now, the reason I put this up here is when people say, well, German expressionism is a root of a noir film. And the answer is yes and no. However, if you look at the difference between what a photograph shows you and what an artist shows you, and I chose the battle scene of Antietam, the Battle of Antietam in the American Civil War, because of its graphic nature. I hope nobody's offended. But you see the camera, the detail,
Yeah.
you can't miss it. You know, it's a battlefield. On the other side, which war is this? Well, it's the Civil War, we kind of know, but there are no real bad pictures of dead people. And yet they both represent war. The camera, however, gives you the detail, the goriness, the effect of war that most people never see, as opposed to a battle scene that's heroic and clean, right? Nobody's bleeding or anything like that. So this whole idea of German expressionism begins with this challenge to the all detailing camera. The art has to evolve. The rejection of conventional morality in favor of pure sensation, as opposed to like the picture of the artist rendition. Writers too, like Oscar Wilde, rejected objective restraint, utilitarianism in favor of the exquisite, the strange, the exotic, and the mysterious. The reason I put those words in there is because of the wonderful selection that the last guest about the Egyptology and the writing and the interest in that kind of mysterious, almost, well, again, magical, surrealistic, but that underlying feeling of evil and predation on people, on just regular people. So you have all these different kinds of ways that the art world responded to the camera. And then I mentioned the Gilded Age, this idea of sentimentalism, transcendentalism, and social critique of the class system. This is very important that we get to that particular aspect of it. Most importantly, there was a growing body of American literature that depicted the realities of social ills. And of course, for America, it's Reconstruction and Tammany Hall, the muckrakers, you know, all this horrible stuff that was going on in America. Now, is German expressionism the root of noir? These people had a foot in both centuries. You have Franco-Prussian War, 1870, and then you have World War I in Europe. For artists, especially like Mr. Kirchner, artistically, he wanted to build a bridge between one century and the next that reflected industrialism. And if you look at his pictures, I've given you two examples here. The yellow and green one, could actually be a movie set. Now, granted, it would be a movie of a surrealistic nature, but it actually could be a movie set. And that's the thing about German Expressionism that the noir people liked, was this idea of a distortion of society, a distortion of film, the way there was a distortion in society. And that's the way he saw the world, as distorted people. They're struggling to adapt, right, to alienation and social change. But Expressionism wasn't just about industrialization. It was about groups of people that wanted independence. They were discovering national identities, wanting to preserve their culture, language, along with self-determination. In other words, my question is, what else was going on while the artists were thinking about the representation of society? There was so much going on, such rapid change, that there was another group of expressionists, and of course, these were the Blue Rider people. Many of these people believed that it was time to change the world. They not only saw society as distorted, they wanted to destroy it. Start all over again, right? Start the world over. It's more than just distorted, it's completely fractured. And if you look at the Blue Rider expressionists, you can see the difference between these two pictures and those two pictures. These have the semblance of some sort of reality that we recognize. People, they may be alienated, but we recognize them as people. I'm not quite sure about the people in these pictures. And I realized that they are certainly good representations of a fractured reality. But they are reality as seen by the eye of the individual, not the camera, but what's going on inside of these people. And that gets us closer then to this idea of what noir is all about. The reason I question German Expressionism as the go-to art form as root of noir is that it peaked about 1920, and then it kind of faded away, and what takes over is Dada, or anarchistic art, and surrealism. Now we're getting into, right, the vocabulary of what we were reading in that article. The French people are looking at it as surrealism, while other people say, no, 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 it's German Expressionism. Now, what's going on in 1920? What else is happening other than these divisions within the art world? Hollywood was making feature films. The genres, westerns, drama, adventure, were already established by 1920. American writers, as we know, Steinbeck, Sinclair Lewis, Upton Sinclair, Robert Reed, all these people go to Moscow. And why is this? Because World War I is over, the Russian Revolution has happened, and Soviet-style socialism, which is different than other socialism, is now represented as a utopia, and the American people who have a problem with industrialization and capitalism in general are now going over there to see this utopia that allegedly exists. The communist parties are established both in Britain and America. Now, I know in Britain, socialism was already within that culture, within your culture. The socialists had representatives in Parliament. In America, not so much. The Democratic Party were more the party of the KKK than obviously socialism. But we did have, obviously, progressivism, which was the beginning of socialism, basically, in America. This rosy picture of freedom, the optimism of building a new society founded on unity and purpose, already the brotherhood and rally around the flag boys, World War I has now disappeared. Lenin dies in 1924. And of course, who comes in but our friend Stalin, who's completely and totally nutty in terms of killing people. I guess he really liked it because he killed a lot of them. Russian Soviet style communism was a hard sell in America, however, for good reason. And a lot of people don't know this about what's going on in America, which is where these films were created that French, the Europeans, the British are looking at America. What is going on in America? Well, on May Day, postal officials discovered 20 bombs in the mail sent to prominent capitalists. We did have a lot of agitation in America. A month later, bombs are exploded in 8 American cities. And I want you to think about this. How is this reflected today? What is going on in America today? Americans hate bombs. We don't like things that go boom and tear bodies apart where the cameras can see it. And that is exactly what is happening by 1920. There's a bomb left at a parked horse-drawn wagon that explodes, right? Another bomb. You've got Senator Thomas Hardwick. He gets a bomb, it explodes. His maid gets hurt, he doesn't. These things happen. Anti-immigrant and anti-communist sentiments reach a high point throughout the 1920s. The revolution of 1917, as well as anarchist, socialist, and communist unrest within the United States, stirs public fear. This is what is known as the first Red Scare. And America was scared. They're not used to bombs on their soil, especially so close after a war. So what happens? By 1925, Bolshevism was competing with another form of socialism, National Socialism, that rejected modern art except the useful kind. Is there anybody that can read this quote? I don't know if we can get it all on one paper here. Oop. Okay, let's go back to. Here we go. Well, I'll read it because maybe I can figure out what it says. I'm sorry that we're not able to see the full screen here.
Yeah, from current slide, I think, if you press that at the top.
I'm sorry.
From,
a bit more to
from
the left.
current slide, give that a go, see what happens. Just move the, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
let's get someone to read it. Robin, do you want to read it? Give your vocal cords a bit of exercise.
I hope you're not quoted out of context, of course.
The function of propaganda does not lie in the scientific training of the individual, but in calling the masses' attention to certain facts, processes, necessities, etc., whose significance is thus for the first time placed within their field of vision. The most brilliant propagandist technique will yield no success unless one fundamental principle is borne in mind constantly and with unflagging attention. It must confine itself to a few points and repeat them over and over. All advertising, whether in the field of business or politics, achieves success through continuity and sustained uniformity of its application. In England, they understood one more thing, that this spiritual weapon can succeed only if it is applied on a tremendous scale. To whom should propaganda be addressed? To the scientifically trained intelligentsia or the less educated masses? Always and exclusively to the masses.
Thank you.
And Hitler wrote this, obviously Mein Kampf was written while he's in prison in 1925. By that time, the world had radio, telegraph, telephone, airplane. And then what happens? In 1927, movies acquire sound, voices, music, gunfire, explosions, screams, etc. And every dictator in the world, or would-be dictator, said, oh my God, talk about propaganda medium. We got it made now. And we see that obviously. From then on, propaganda is available to just about anybody with a cause if you have the money. And of course, Hitler writes Mein Kampf and makes his living throughout his life off the royalties of that book. Now, this goes back to, obviously, German Expressionism. What, for example, would we say about a poster that was to advertise a new soap and describe the other soap as good? We would only, well, it's supposed to be shake, typo, shake our heads. And it's the same for political advertising. English propaganda understood all of this most business brilliantly and had acted accordingly. They do. I can't see the rest of this quote, but Hitler admits that when it came to World War I, Britain and America were superior in their propaganda. And what he does is go out and find people who are equally, at least he hopes, as equally as talented as the English and the American propagandists. Oh, and just as a side note, the best colors for symbols that carry a message: red, black, gold, and white. Just, I don't know. So.
Is the colours of the Eurovision Song Contest, by the way. I don't know if anyone noticed.
What then makes a film a noir film is not just the criteria that we saw at the beginning of the PowerPoint. It's not just camera angles, lighting, the criminal's point of view, dialogue, mood, darkness, death, or depravity. Its content is social realism, soft communism propaganda. I want to read you something from a book called Hollywood Party: How Communism Seduced the American Film Industry in the 1930s and 40s. And this is what the communists say about film in Hollywood that includes these noir films especially. He says, party leaders like William Z. Foster, author of Towards a Soviet America, knew it would not be possible to produce a blatantly propagandistic picture of the commercial cinema. In any case, that was not the product the party bosses sought. We are less interested in a film that has communist content, where a few hundred people will come and see it. Party boss Earl Bowder used to tell party writers on trips to Hollywood, we are more interested in an ordinary John and Mary picture in which there is only a drop of progressive thought. Elia Kazan, Albert Maltz's friend and fellow veteran of the radical stage, had acted in the films City for Conquest and Blues in the Night, and in 1945 began directing features. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn confirmed his directorial skills translated well to the screen. As Kazan explained, the communist writers down at Stanley Rose's bookstore used to brag about what good things they had slipped into their work, which the studio overseers were too stupid and too unpolitical to notice. Some of these scribes learned their method in the Communist Party Writers' Clinic. Screenwriter and communist teacher John Howard Lawson told his students not to try to write an entire communist picture, but to get in 5 minutes of the communist doctrine or the party line in every script. He urged them to stick that 5 minutes into an expensive scene with expensive stars, so that if someone in the front office caught a whiff of it, he would find it hard to justify cutting the scene on a cost basis. When possible, the writers should make someone like Gary Cooper or some other important star actually say the message, so that if the scene had to be reshot, great expense would be involved and it would be more likely that the propaganda would stay within the movie. Now, this is really interesting. When producer William Allen would show scripts to party officials such as Lawson, Dalton Trumbo, and John Stapp, all of them part of the Hollywood 10 that were blacklisted, they would order changes. One strict taboo was that a businessman could not be shown in a good light. Anything with a psychological angle in the style of Alfred Hitchcock was also forbidden, even though some communist writers wanted to pursue it, because, as the People's Daily World put it, the psychological approach sent the message that the illness is not in the social system, it is within you. Party members themselves described the party line as violently anti-Freud, even though some found the need for analysis themselves. When William Allen let it be known that he saw a therapist, he was told he could not attend party meetings. My argument is this. When you watch noir films, look at what they say about the society. What is the critique? What separates the noir film from the gangster films of the 20s and 30s? How are they different? They're different in content. They have this, and they say pessimism or nihilism, or whatever word you want to use. But basically the message is the same. Life sucks. People in power are usually stupid and corrupt. American workers are exploited. You're alone throughout your life. Nobody can be trusted. Even successful people like those listed below can see how terrible is the price they pay for individual success. And I've listed here some of the names that, quite frankly, I was surprised at how many of them work in the film noir industry and were part of the Communist Party during the time those films were being made. Now,
oh, sorry, you're saying all these people on the screen were members of the Communist Party or affiliated groups?
yeah.
You
Mhm.
did? Oh.
And in fact, more. I could go on and on and on. It was just absolutely amazing, the list. But I thought these were people that we would easily recognize. Burt Lancaster, Kirk Douglas, Melvin Douglas, which is not on the list here, but is listed in the book. Just so many of them, it was just phenomenal. So that by the time you get to the end of the golden era of noir movies, what are you looking at? Well, you're looking at what else is going on. The prosecution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who were executed. You're looking at the House Un-American Activities Committee, which, by the way, never blacklisted anybody. What happened was the film or the studio owners did the blacklisting of people who either cooperated with or did not cooperate with the House Un-American Committee questioning. And these people, after World War II and in the early 50s, broke away from Moscow-oriented communism to the more moderate socialism of, let's say, Debs and Eugene Debs. Because why? Russian communism was Soviet-style communism. Even within Germany, there was a big fight going on between the Bolsheviks, of course, and the socialists that were already a part of the German government. They were so busy fighting each other that they missed out on a lot of opportunities to get and keep converts. Some of these people disavowed Moscow, Soviet communism, and went back to ordinary socialism. And like I say, I included the names of famous people, of names that most people would recognize. So the question becomes, if you're going to look at film noir only retrospectively, you may miss the really important thing that was going on when these films were being made, because most of them, not all, but most of them were made by the people who immigrated to America during the 20s, 30s, and 40s, especially Jewish directors, actors, screenwriters, and that sort of thing. So that's the reason I wanted to concentrate on the article we read first, because you will notice they use the same vocabulary of surrealism, capitalist, right, all these political terms that Americans don't really know anything about. To this day, they don't know anything about it. And it is quite a hurdle to overcome. And as we see in America now, people are saying, well, what's wrong with communism? What's wrong with socialism? We want it, we want it, we want it. And if they watch noir movies, they may think differently, or not, I don't know. But anyway, that's sort of what I wanted to talk to you about. I will stop now, stop share. Well, that wasn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be. So anyway, the next time you watch a film noir, and I don't know, did anybody here watch any film noirs at all?
I've watched quite a lot over the years, and the most recent one, I suppose, was, well, I know I'm familiar with Double Indemnity, Out of the Past, which in England is called Build My Gallows High.
Right, yeah.
And other ones like The Big Sleep, Maltese Falcon, I know all these. You're intellectualizing something which for me is just a lot of fun, really.
Actually, it is. It's funny to me that as soon as the French come out with this term, immediately the academics have to jump in and make a thing, right? They've got entire writing courses, about film noir, writing noir. I mean, it's a big business. And well, of course, that's what America is about, so that makes sense. But I found it very humorous myself to make a big to-do about something that's actually very simple, which was, it's all propaganda. And in fact, Fritz Lang actually comes out and says, I'm not an expressionist. I know something about expressionism, and yeah, I sort of like use it in my films, but not really. I'm not an expressionist filmmaker. And in fact, to him, it was a joke. The whole idea that somehow something that happened in 1900, the later years of the 1800s, first years of the 1900s, is identified as film noir that was in the 1940s. After 2 wars. He said that doesn't make any sense, but okay. So yeah. But
Yeah,
anyway, go ahead.
Sorry, so you go ahead. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No,
Oh,
that's okay.
I just get to thank you for allowing me to see these films, which I don't know as well as perhaps I should, or as well as other people here, from a different perspective, more with the knowledge of the cultural forces that produce them. So that is very valuable. And I think your slideshow is very easy to follow, and you presented your evidence very, very well. So thanks for marshalling it in that way. One question I'd like to ask, were there directors or people involved in the production of films at the time that perceived this movement with the ideological element that it carried with it, and were producing films that were in some sense in conscious opposition to that, maybe.
Well, let me just say one thing. In 1946, well, let's start with 1941, Maltese Falcon. Nobody sat down and said, today I'm going to write a film noir.
Yeah.
So there isn't this consciousness of we're creating a genre. What you had was a lot of these immigrants come and simply making the same sort of films that they made in Europe.
Mm.
And that's one of the things that America is either enriched or suffers from, depending on your point of view, and that is the immigration that comes in with its own set of values. And of course, these folks were much better educated than Americans. They were more politically astute. Americans really, like I say, they don't know much about, they probably couldn't tell you the difference between capitalism and communism. They don't know. And did they know back then? Probably if they'd been to Europe during the war years, they would. But certainly not when they were, if they had not had that experience. They were not conscious of it. Now, when you get to the making, as I said, of classical film noir, yes, they were very conscious of the content that they were putting in. I call it soft communist porn, because they were conscious that they were actually producing an American form of propaganda. And in fact, the unions that were already, the trade unionism in America, when Soviet style communism came in, there was this big brouhaha in Hollywood of who was actually going to run the unions of the Hollywood actors and the people, the grips and the gophers and the screenwriters, editors of all, because those people, don't forget, during the Depression especially, they weren't making any money, while these Hollywood people, the stars, were making tons of money. Movies were so popular, the studios were making money hand over fist. So the communists thought, you know what? These people need a soft form of communist education and propagandizing. And they were very successful. Is there anybody here that looked at a film noir and said, oh, I recognize that as communist propaganda? You may now. If you go back and watch and listen to the dialogue and look at the tropes that are in these classical noir films, you can see it. It's very evident, right? Okay, let's take one thing from the list, the femme fatale. It's a trope in all noir movies. But what are they doing? What are those women doing? They're trying to make a living. They're trying to succeed. They're trying to get some sort of, money, basically, by doing what? By entrapping these men and maneuvering these men who have any kind of wealth, because even if you're a newspaper reporter or an insurance agent or something, you have resources that these women can get at if they can make you willing to share them. And of course, for Soviet style communism, there's complete equality of the sexes, right? Women shouldn't have to sell their bodies and manipulate men in order to survive. And that's a communist trope, right? What do they push? Equality of women. Now, however you feel about that, that's your personal business. But recognize that in those films, what you're looking at are people who are struggling to get some sort of income revenue stream. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, no, it's an good point. No, I mean, I think my question was, could you point to like a film blanc kind of tradition that sort of people that sort of sprung up that's discernibly different, that doesn't have this communist undercurrent.
Well, you mean in terms of noir films?
Well, no, just something
Or
that
just
happened
any
at the
film?
same time that was produced by people that kind of perceived this element of ideology in some of the noir films and tried to produce something that was actually without it, but maybe there wasn't. So maybe this doesn't exist.
Well,
Disaster movies, surely.
How is that without
Disaster movies aren't they right-wing propaganda? It's all about saving the world from outside threat, and then the happy American family comes together at the end. And look at that, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the other films that were made that were like gangster films, right, of the 20s and 30s, they weren't made by these people. They weren't made by immigrants who came. Well, everybody in America is an immigrant, but they didn't have that agenda. Let's put it that way. And there were many films
the gangster films didn't have that agenda. The gangster, is that what you said? Sorry, do you mean?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at I'm trying to think. Were No Angels, about the three criminals that are that in the end help people. In other words, there are some films that had happy endings, right? Like you say, I'm trying to think of some of the ones that.
What's that? The one with James Stewart is,
I'm just going to say
relives his life. I thought that's a very famous film, isn't it? Which is considered to be very right wing.
They mentioned the making of that film in this book. In other words, while they're making film noirs, they're also making the Ten Commandments and
yeah.
you know, and the Cleopatra, you know, historical films and stuff that don't have that slant.
Michael, did you say It's a Wonderful Life? You did, didn't you?
Yeah, that's I didn't say the name. I forgot the name of the film, but absolutely, yes.
There's another strain of Hollywood, obviously, that is making films, like you say, family films, especially during the war, pro-American films, right? Pro-liberty, pro-capitalist film. This is one of the problems that the communists had. The two things that defeat communism for really taking hold, and I would even suggest in your country as well, is prosperity and nationalism. Why? Communism is against individual private property, and it's for internationalism. So during the war, when you have, you know, the nations banding together, rally around their flag, fighting their wars, their wars against fascism, I lost my train of thought. What was my point?
There was a development of kind of in times of war or something of this rallying around certain ideas that are anti-communist.
These things defeat the ideology, and why it's so difficult to overcome that. Why they had to use the softer approach. Because why? People are, you know, everybody had a son, a brother, a sister, somebody who died in that war, you know, to try and convince people that they died for nothing, that your country, throw it away and become an internationalist. That ain't gonna work. And it didn't. So they had to find a way around it. But as you point out, there were a lot of films that reinforced American values, and some of them were made by people who were simply good filmmakers. I'm thinking about On the Waterfront, right? If you look at that film, it's about unions. And they always show that famous clip of Marlon Brando, you know, I could have been somebody, I could have been a contender. I could have been successful if it wasn't for a dirty union. Well, aren't the communists pro-union? Well, yeah, they are, but they also recognize the corruption in American unions. We want you to be Soviet unions. Again, once again, they're fighting among themselves, which is another clue to their defeat. But anyway, that's like I say, I hope I answered your question.
Would a genre that was distinctly not noir be that of the cowboy film, maybe, or
Well,
John Wayne and so forth?
you had a contingent, obviously, of anti-communism, obviously, a big strain, even while we were making nice with the Soviets during World War II. There were people that were unhappy about that because they remember World War I, like I say, and the agitation then, because, and like I say, there's a little bit of difference between obviously American noir films and British gangster films and detectives and that sort of thing. You guys have Sherlock Holmes, we have Mickey Spillane and Mike Hammer and all those people running around. So
I want to bring up one thing that struck me, a very interesting subject, but I always thought more of the American noir films as being written by people who thought that was a pessimistic reproduction of reality rather than politically seeing something behind it. But I wanted to add to that, is it not the case that sometimes it's seen as an example of rugged American individualism? Particularly, I thought Ayn Rand wrote about Raymond Chandler as one of the few writers who presented her ideal, American ideal of freedom against communitarianism, and she actually described him as one of the few American writers she admired.
But he wasn't English. He went to Dulwich College.
he went to where?
He went to Dulwich College, which is a school not far from where I live. But
interesting fact.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, unless I'm in.
No, you could well be right. I have no idea what college he went to. It's surprising, yeah.
But I do know that Lillian Hellman remained dedicated all her life. She never got off the communist bandwagon, and I know that it's very hard for people if you dedicate your life and your belief system to an ideology that other people come to hate and fight against. It becomes a thing for you to maintain that ideology. That I know.
But the point interests me, or what I'm trying to get at, is that when Raymond Chandler writes his stories, there is this hard-bitten realism. Is he writing from the point of view that is the way the world is? Is he just writing from the point of view that will sell books? Or is he writing with some kind of left-wing agenda? That's a real, I really don't know. Well,
I'm not quite sure that those things
are exclusive.
All be true at the same time.
You
know, especially for Americans, they're all over the map. Like I say, when you look at the list of people that I showed you, just that real short list, these people are making tons of money. I mean, it seems so incongruous that the very people, even in America today, the very people that are espousing the blessings of them, let's all sing Kumbaya and become a communist utopia, are the very same people that are buying multi-million-dollar homes, and many of them at that.
Yeah.
So there's this contradiction built into the American experience that Americans don't really seem to mind or notice when you think about it. Whereas other people who are a little bit more sane and maybe a little bit more intellectually oriented can say, well, wait a minute. You're talking out of both sides of your mouth here. If you're for communalism and community, how come you're not giving all those dollar bills to the ghettos and doing something in there if you're against poverty? Which brings it back to India. You've got all these. How come after all this time you're trying to tell me that nothing's changed in the last 200 years? That somehow it makes no difference that there's all this wealth and you're espousing the sharing of misery instead of the sharing of wealth. It doesn't make any sense. So, but in terms of rugged individualism, you're absolutely right. There is this strain, again, the noir people, as recent immigrants, are having a difficult time coping with the fact that America likes John Wayne, who didn't go to war, didn't fight, but made wonderful war movies. And nobody saw the contradiction of that either. In fact, sidetrack here, it's rather interesting that people also are so divided, they come to blows over the fact of whether John Wayne is a patriot or a coward simply because he didn't serve on active duty in World War II, even though he got an exemption because he was married and had 4 children. It's like,
And did he not have some medical condition as well? I
yeah,
think
yes, he did. Yeah, as well as being exempt for marriage and having all these children to support.
Sorry, I know this is not exactly the on topic, but I think he was awarded by some student association a derisory kind of award of the most kind of ridiculous actor or something, and then he had the audacity to actually accept it and go to the function, and he sort of won them over by his kind of instance and frankness, and they kind of cheered him when he left. I don't know.
Well, it's like they say, there's no such thing as bad publicity. There probably isn't anything bad about silly publicity either. Right? So, when you're talking American Hollywood, but I do think it's fascinating to me, because quite frankly, this was the book I was going to write. And then I found it written by someone else. And it's like, well, golly gee whiz, now I don't have my book to write. I'll have to write something else, I guess. This is really a good book. I recommend it. It's like I say, I had no idea about these people. I thought Burt Lancaster was a cat's pajamas until I read this and found out he was a communist. It's like, oh, darn it. But
yeah, I think you present a very cogent case, and I think next time I watch one of these films, it will help me to have a longer perspective, because the intellectual concerns at the time that the thing was being made inevitably do affect how it was shaped. And I think you had a very good quote about some advice from someone. If it can contain one drop of communism or something, that's going to be very effective. If it had too much, it wouldn't be effective. And I think that.
And you notice that the French are the people that give it the noir label, right? What's going on with them? Well, they're new wave cinema. The Italians had cinema veritas, right? Which is what truth in film, the truth about society. So you had this whole European, interest in looking at life more realistically. The artists, by the way, have now accepted the camera as an art tool. And there's this whole idea that camera work can be artistic, where we did not see that when the first cameras came out. They were the enemy in terms of the painter. Now we accept photography as an art form. Well, like everything else, things evolve. And I think the many of the screenwriters evolved as well. Capra, for instance, right? It makes Why We Fight, makes all kinds of propaganda films for the Department of Defense during World War II, and worried about the morality of making propaganda film We don't worry about that anymore. We accept it and say, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do with film. Fight for your side with whatever weapon you have available. And for them, it was film. So makes sense.
AJ, please, you have a question.
Yeah, no, I just had a comment
Oh,
that for those, some people profess being less familiar with this genre. And I don't know who can get what stations, but in the United States, there's a very famous station called Turner Classic Movies,
Right. Yeah.
various streaming services and stuff. And there's a show on every Saturday night called Noir Alley. Every single Saturday night, they show a film noir. And there's a narrator, a host of the show, that actually delves in every single episode into communist influences and who was of the people that participated in each movie, who was called before the House Un-American activities. And he talks about all these insidious influences. I mean, he's obviously a fan of film noir.
Oh, yeah.
It's an art form aside from any use that may have been put to, right? And I would strongly recommend, I've been assiduously watching that show for years and years. It's very good, and it shows a lot of these classics and a lot of lesser known. Eddie Muller, the host, runs something called the Film Noir Foundation that is constantly finding old film and restoring it. And he very often screens newly restored films that have never been seen. So I'm just strongly recommended for anybody who's developed an interest in this. I've had an interest in years, not so much sociological as just I like film noir. I guess I'm morbid, but I like film noir. And that is just an excellent show. And the narration, the host, is almost as entertaining, sometimes more so, than the movies, because he highlights things. When you see the movie, after like our guest today, after you hear what he has to say, then you watch the movie in a different way than you would have otherwise.
the gentleman is called Eddie Muller.
Eddie Muller is his name.
Muller, okay.
Yeah, and he is good. He is, in fact, that's what watching his show religiously, and as you did, that really just piqued my interest. It was like, wait a minute. The great thing is how he integrates the lives of the actors, and you learn about the problems in their life that may have shortcut their careers. Simply by knowing or talking to certain people. That to me was so egregious, to think that just because you know somebody doesn't mean that you accept their ideology or that you're going to run out and give money to the Communist Party. But a lot of these actors had really sad lives, I thought, and were prohibited from making other kinds of films after they made film noirs, which I always thought was kind of interesting. But Eddie Muller is just, oh my God, he is the noir god.
Yeah. Great.
Excellent tip. Thank you very much for that.
There's also something that I might add, that being a Hollywood type person and aficionado of the films, Eddie Muller always, as is generally the case in popular culture in America, depicts the House Un-American activities as the villains, and a lot of the accusations as unjustified. Now, I forgot where I read this, but I've read reputable articles that say that after the opening up of the Soviet archives, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it turns out that a lot of the people, if not most, that were actually interviewed by the House Un-American activities were listed by the Soviets as actual Soviet agents. So that the suspicions were justified. A lot of these guys were communists. Okay. Now, whether you should persecute communists or not is open to interpretation. However, the fact that they were appears to be a historical fact. And in American popular culture, especially that promulgated by Hollywood, you get the impression that these were unwarranted accusations, like they're called witch hunts and stuff. I'm hearing a lot of that vocabulary right now, but they may have been witch hunts, but a lot of these people were witches, you know, what can I say?
Well, and it's absolutely true. McCarthy was, you know, they paint him as sort of this wild, frenzied, you know, crazy person who is, you know, a communist under every rock. But the fact of the matter was, even in Britain, you had, right, the four people, and I can't remember their names now, but you had communist spies in the British government. And
coming back to, yes.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, coming back to film noir, I mean, I mean, I've got a list here of film noir films which I've seen over the years. It must be 15 to 20, and they obviously haven't had any effect on me. I don't think I've become more left wing as a result of watching them. I really don't think. I dare say you're right as to that may have been what the influence, the influences which the directors were feeding off, but I don't think it's had very much effect on your American film girl at all.
It's another issue entirely, isn't it? An interesting point. Yeah.
Well, what's the point? If it's propaganda, if it's meant to be propaganda, it hasn't been much of a success. Like, that's all I can say.
Well, maybe you're a unique person.
Robin, perhaps you're more anti-American as a result of watching them. Is that possible?
No,
I mean, you can have that element as well. No, you're not. Okay.
No,
okay.
certainly not. No, I can't say that it paints a nice picture of American society. But then I'm well aware it's a film. It's not meant to be representative.
Well, actually, there's, you know, whether we like it or not, the fact of the matter is that there is extreme, and there was, especially after the war, World War I, you know, a bonus army, right? Pershing rides down on them, and you know, the veterans just came and said, hey, you promised us XYZ, we want XYZ, and they didn't get it. So I mean, there's so much truth behind this other side propaganda of McCarthy as just, like I say, this wild-eyed crazy person. And he wasn't. Especially if you read a book like this where he names names, and pretty soon you realize, you know, which, by the way, McCarthy was never at the Hollywood hearings. He didn't do that. It was given to someone else to do. There were people that did cooperate. Ronnie Reagan, who became president, cooperated with the House Un-American Activities Committee. So there were a lot of people who, movie stars and stuff, who were perfectly not in the Communist Party, that made movies because they made movies, and their ideology was not influenced at all by communist infiltration. On the other hand, if you look at what's going on in Hollywood now, it may not have affected so much American population in general, but certainly Hollywood has maintained its leftist viewpoint. And even now, people will say, if you want work in Hollywood, you have to be politically correct. There's a different vocabulary, but it's the same stuff. You know, you got to toe the line, or you're not going to work, period. So I don't know. But in terms of being insulting to Americans, no, it isn't. Not at all. Because why? American people are so distracted by other stuff that they don't pay much attention really to what they're seeing. I can just see the Russians now saying to themselves, oh my God, these people, what are we going to do with them? They're just so dumb when it comes to politics. And for the most part, it's true.
Jenean, what just slightly to change the focus, what would be your favorite example aesthetically of this particular genre, as a really enjoyable film noir?
Well, I'll tell you, I've got three that I watch
Yeah.
practically every night of my life. My cat likes to hear the music. It's the funniest thing. For me, Double Indemnity is probably, and other people as well, the quintessential film noir. It has all the tropes, and it has, well, for one thing, it has good actors. And that makes a lot of difference. You know, some of them can get kind of cheesy, but the ones that have like real actors, I mean, Barbara Stanwyck, really, she's a pretty good actress. So, and Edward G. Robinson is in that film. So you're getting quality people who can deliver a quality script very well.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, as Aurelio does, I find film, they're entertaining to me. I like to watch them. But that would be probably, and Out of the Past. Why?
Out of the Past, right. Okay.
Out of the Past, yeah. Why? It's got Kirk Douglas in it. And that was his like introduction to Hollywood. That was one of the first films he made. And Robert Mitchum, actor during the Depression, you know, busted for marijuana. He's like a real person. And this is so funny. It was one of the first movies I remember seeing as a kid. I was like a real little kid, like 7, when I first saw it. Of course, I didn't see it in 1944 or whatever it was made. But, and I had the biggest crush on Robert Mitchum. It was the funniest thing. I always thought he was like, oh my God, he's so handsome. So that's one of my favorites to it, you know, stroll down memory lane kind of thing.
And what's the third? I think you mentioned 3. So we've had Double Indemnity, Out of the Past. And what's the oh yeah.
The third one that's there. Oh, what's its name? I can't think of it now.
The Maltese Falcon.
Maltese Falcon.
Oh, okay.
Excuse me. Yeah, I watch that one all the time, mainly because of the lady that's in it,
Mary Astor.
Mary Astor. Thank you. You'll have to be the name person. Be remembering names. Yeah.
I'm going to have to go in a moment, Michael.
Oh,
Okay, Robin,
think-
well, thanks very much for
I think we may be
Winding up.
winding up
here.
anyway. Yeah.
Yes, so I think, yeah, if you hang on for a couple of
Sure,
seconds, I
okay.
think we can all depart together maybe.
Right,
Oh,
okay.
okay. Well, that's a good recommendation.
Yeah, an incentive to look at. So that's some very good tips there. I mean, both for titles and also a streaming service, which is very useful because I'm always rather confused by how one can access films.
Yeah,
what films one-
that sounds a really good thing that's been going on. That, you know, that such a an educated focus on that genre by this gentleman. And
There's an open source site that has, like I say, YouTube. You can watch them for free, and you don't have to pay for streaming services. And you watch them in their entirety. No commercials. Thank you. And there's one that's a preservation, and they offer 64 noir movies. And you know, I don't know if there's actually 64. Like I say, the golden era. I don't know if there's more than 64, but they offer 64 noir movies, and you can watch them in their entirety. It's a big thing in America now, the revival of interest. So anyway,
black and white films are a bit like the revival that's taking place in LPs and things like that. You know, there's a certain charm. There is a beauty in black and white, things being simplified, you know, aesthetically. You know, I think there's a lot to be said for that. Well, perhaps it's a good time to for us to thank you, Jenean, for a very
Yes.
stimulating
I know.
presentation.
Deserved one or two more people. Very sorry we didn't.
Yeah,
have-
it's not good. I don't know what we should do to publicize it, but I don't quite understand it. But there you are. We must. Yeah, the main thing is the quality, not.
Indeed,
not-
absolutely, absolutely.
Quite frankly, I think
Oh, Mother's Day over
discussion
here.
is better than,
Oh, it's Mother's Day, and might have played a role. I hadn't thought of that. That's true. Yeah.
Most of the people who come here, maybe I don't know.
They tend
Anyway,
not to have Mother's Day
Yeah,
live. That's true, but
our mothers are sort of
Yeah.
elsewhere in another place.
yeah, that's true. But who knows?
All right. Well, thanks, Jenean, very much. Thanks, Robin,
well, thanks for.
Sage,
listening.
your comment.
Thank you, Jenean.
I
Very,
tend to
very
very
go
much.
on, so I appreciate you listening.
Maybe we
I
should
really enjoyed it.
had it in black and white today. I think but anyway, all right then. Enjoy the rest of your.
Yeah, I'm off to lunch with my daughter. We're going out for Mother's Day, so
Oh no!
There you
Right.
go. You see,
Oh,
where
it's-
Mother's Day does have. Of course, you could be a mother yourself. Yeah,
I
we're not all men. Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
yeah.
It's been fun. I really enjoyed it.
Oh well, thank you very much, and
Thank
yeah,
you.
I enjoyed it too.
It's good. All right.
So all the best,
Have a good
everybody.
evening.
Until next time. Yes.
Until next time.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye.